Welcome on into the Wolverine.com podcast. Clayton Safey here with Anthony Broom and Chris Ballas on a Thursday with 16 days until Michigan kicks off its season. So here we go. It is really coming. We've been saying that for a while, but it is very, very close to being here. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like the video, hit that thumbs up. If you're excited for Michigan's 2023 season, the number 2 Wolverines heading in both the AP and the coaches poll, subscribe to our channel. And as always, head to the Wolverine.com for all of your Michigan football, basketball, and recruiting coverage. Fellas, how's it going today?
Great. It's a little rainy here, a little dark. Had to turn on all the lights so you could see me. Sorry to anybody watching, but here we are, man. And it's like you said, 16 days. I can't wait.
Yeah, it's a little gloomy outside. We're kind of getting to that point of fall camp where you're just kind of itching for it to be game week. I feel like with this roster, and we'll talk about all this, but it feels like it's been a mostly low-key camp for the most part. There's been some movement in some areas, which we'll get to, but I'll stop short of saying it's the dog days, but we're being pulled in so many directions right now, you guys. And, in a lot of ways, it feels like we are mid-season already. So excited for actual games here. The closer we get to that, the less it becomes about some of that off-field stuff, the Harbaugh stuff with the NCAA. Let's just talk ball and play some ball.
Yep. Extremely exciting. We are brought to you today by Home Field Apparel, the premium collegiate apparel brand based in Indianapolis. Home Field has a commitment to creating incredibly comfortable, officially licensed apparel with vintage college designs. There are over 150 colleges to choose from, including your Michigan Wolverines. Home Field is dedicated to delving into the archives and history of Michigan to discover unique logos and iconic moments to create thoughtfully designed products. Home Field is perfect for showing off team pride as college football returns. Head to homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code Wolverine23. That's one word, Wolverine23, for 15% off your first order. If you're watching on YouTube, you see some of the products there. You got old school stuff, Rose Bowl. Anthony, you are a big Home Field guy. What do you think about the new drop they just released?
I'm a fan. I just they gave me some credit to go shop around the store a little bit and grabbed a 1992, I think it was the Rose Bowl or Big Ten Champions shirt. Because
how do we get this credit?
Yeah,
what else? It's grandfathered in. I mean, you gotta be in the know. But no, yeah. So excited to partner with them, obviously, and yeah. I mean, I have an entire drawer full of stuff from them dating back to, I think their initial drop was sometime in 2020. So, and they've refreshed their lines. It seems like every year since then. So a lot of cool stuff there from our friends at Home Field.
So homefieldapparel.com, promo code Wolverine23, one word, Wolverine, the numerals 23 for 15% off your first order. Let's get into some official business here. Jim Harbaugh's press conference the other day, Tuesday afternoon, kind of the midway point of fall camp, as we talked about, 16 days until the season. So it's game week right around the corner as well. The first thing that you kind of notice when listening to him talk is just how focused he is on this season. He's asked about Washington and Oregon joining the Big Ten in 2024. Doesn't really have an opinion on it. Doesn't really have an opinion on being ranked preseason number 2 in both major polls. He's trying to do the things that his wife Sarah is asking him to do around the house, but he said truthfully he's just kind of locked in on this football team. He couldn't comment on the NCAA stuff as expected, but he used the term locked in. He used the term focused for not just him, but the entire team. I mean, he was excited talking about the coaches being up there grinding on practice tape and trying to get the scripts ready for the next day because Tuesday was an off day. He called, he said that an NFL, either scout or general manager that was through, called this a vibrant, energy around the program. He described the first scrimmage that was just, not flawless, but they were able to take everything they were doing on State Street, translate it to Main Street, and guys weren't forgetting things and all that. So it just feels like this team's in a really good place right now, and so is Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, he seemed relaxed and didn't seem to have a care in the world about this NCAA crap and everything else. And of course, there were a couple of people who asked the questions. Will this you know what, maybe encourage you to look at the NFL even harder next year, so on and so forth. And he wasn't biting on that. We knew who was going to ask it. And we knew when it was going to be asked. It was asked, and we knew what the response was going to be. So he's happy about this football program and this team. What I would love to see is for them to put this behind them. There is still a chance, guys, as the NCAA told ESPN, that, you know what, maybe something does happen this year in terms of a suspension with Jim Harbaugh. Maybe it's not expected at this point, but I know people are still talking. So to me, that would be ideal. And then you sign Jim Harbaugh to his big deal. They were waiting on that until the NCAA stuff is resolved. So, and then to have him finish his career here for over the next 10 years would be perfect. So this thing's humming. And if they get the NIL where it needs to be, you look at this team now, everybody who's been at practice has said the same thing. This is a national championship caliber team. And of course, there are always going to be bumps in the road and things that can happen. But there's no question that this team is extremely talented on both sides of the ball and so deep. It's pretty much, they got everything you're looking for.
They check all the boxes. I mean, the mentality is there. The culture's there. I mean, all this talk about NIL, like they don't have a roster full of guys that are just chasing a bag. Like it's all boats are rowing in the same direction, to borrow a saying from our friend PJ Fleck. But the roster is as deep as it's been. I think they're as athletic as they've been. They're as big and as physical as they've been. So, the fact that, when everyone is saying it, like it's not just a PR spin that this team is as locked in as it's been. I mean, the fact that this camp has kind of been so low key is that, like I said before, you have so many known commodities, and you go back to even that team from 2021. There are guys still on this team that were big contributors back then. So the fact that it does feel like a continuation, and I know we've heard that comparison a few times, this feels like the third part of a 3-part trilogy. And I don't know if it ends like The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, where they win a national title or they win a title and he's out. I don't know if that's how it ends with Harbaugh. I don't know if Harbaugh stays, JJ McCarthy stays, this thing rolls into 2024. I don't know, but all I know is that in the here and now, this is as good and as well oiled a machine as I've ever seen Michigan football. And again, I was 4 or 5 years old in '97, and don't remember much of the '90s. But this is impressive the way they have this going right now, and I think the hype is justified.
I'm starting to buy some of the hype in one position group in particular. There's a common denominator, it seemed like, from Saturday's scrimmage with, we talked about it on Monday, but Chris, your intel piece from that, with Jim Harbaugh talking about some of the situational stuff they did on Monday, same with the BTN analysts. And then again, Tuesday, Jim Harbaugh reiterating the last couple of days, the defensive line in some of those situations at the goal line, in short yardage situations, was getting the better of the offensive line. He said maybe 51%, but it seemed to be kind of a consensus. And we've heard a lot about Chris Jenkins this camp. Now he's trying to take that step to be an elite pass rusher. Zach Zinter called him that already, and Zach Zinter, one of the best guards, Dane Brugler from The Athletic thinks he's the best guard draft prospect this year, is saying that Chris Jenkins is, kind of getting the better of him as he was knocking off the rust early on during fall camp. But Mason Graham up there, Jesse Minter thinks Kenneth Grant's going to be somebody that everybody knows about this year. Rayshon Benny gets talked about too, the way he's progressing. And then you have the edge guys as well. I'm starting to buy some of the hype in this defensive line, and they're going against a really good O-line. You have to note that they're mixing and matching up there, and we'll talk about some of the position battles. But either way, I think it's impressive, kind of what we've heard about that group.
Yeah, Cam Good too has really come on from what we've heard. So you've got 5 guys there on the defensive among the defensive tackles, and the freshmen are playing well as well. They're going to have to wait their turn, but you're going to see maybe a couple of those guys get some snaps and still be able to hang on to their red shirts. But to me, I picked that group, guys, and it was a tough one in the football preview magazine coming out of spring. Everything that we'd heard about the defensive line and Mason Graham's improvement, and man, has he taken a step. And that guy was already a stud last year. Chris Jenkins and how far he's come, and then the edges. I had them number 2 as a position group behind the running backs overall on this team, and I thought, should I really put them above the offensive line with those 2 guards coming back? And then I switched it a couple weeks ago into camp, and then I switched it back, and I said, you know what, this defensive line I think is legit. So if they can get some guys rushing the passer up from the edges, it sounds like Jalen Harrell's playing well. It sounds like Josiah Stewart's going to be a beast as a pass rusher. So you get those guys are going to work, split some reps there and see what happens. And then Braden McGregor, and I still think Derek Moore has the most upside of any of them as a pass rusher. If you had to pick one, guys, who would you pick as the leading sacks guy? Somebody actually asked that in chat today. I said it could be one of 4 guys. And you know what? And I think they're going to get some more from the interior too. Who would you pick, AB?
Man.
Yeah.
That's tough because they're going to go 4 deep, and it's not like, even you look at last year, and there were a couple guys clearly ahead in terms of the snap counts, but all those guys pretty much played about the same amount of snaps. So it's really just, who goes out and has a 3-sack game, and that puts them ahead. And for me, I think push comes to shove, I think it's probably Braden McGregor. I think there are a lot of plays last year where it just felt like he was, maybe a fingertip away or just that close to finishing off a play. And, it wasn't, again, he'll never be able to avoid the Aiden Hutchinson comparison. And I make it here in the case of, it took Aiden until his senior year to learn how to finish plays. And I don't think they could be the same caliber of guy. I think you're talking about a guy who's, maybe on your Mount Rushmore of, modern Michigan players. But I think Braden McGregor, something just screams breakout year for him. And I liked what we saw last year. Just need to take it that next step further. And I think he can.
Clay?
I got a hot take. I think the guy with the best chance to lead this team.
Let me guess. Chris Jenkins?
No, but
okay.
I heard Angelique with Borton and Crawford last week saying his goal is to get 7 or 8 or something like that.
Yeah, which might lead the team. Okay,
right.
So what's your hot take?
Absolutely might. Mike Morris at 7.5 last year was second in the Big Ten. So that could be, one of those numbers. You're not going to have 14-11 like Ojabo or Hutchinson and Ojabo. 2 years ago, you might. Josiah Stewart might have the best chance to lead this team in sacks for a couple of reasons. One, he is, billed as a great pass rusher. It sounds like he's doing that already during camp, especially when you talk to the offensive linemen who are saying, yeah, he can really, he's not the biggest guy, but he can get low. It's kind of like Drake Nugent at center almost, on the other side of the line where he's 6'1", maybe a little bit undersized, but his pad level really helps. So I think Josiah Stewart, but on top of that, he's going to be out there for most of those passing downs. When Jesse Minter was asked about the edges last week, he kind of talked about Braden McGregor and Derek Moore on that one side. It's kind of a toss-up. We'll see. Maybe one guy will start one game. Next guy will start the next. But with the other side, he kind of said Josiah Stewart, really good against the pass. Jalen Harrell, really good against the run, becoming a more complete player. They're both going to play. I could see that side really being a true rotation based on situation. So I may go with him. Who do you have if you had to pick one out of the 4?
I almost did. And the only reason I didn't is because I think Jalen's going to get some of those opportunities too. I don't think they're going to take him off the field on all of them. And I think you're going to see Josiah Stewart playing some more on rundowns as well, at least in the early going. So I picked Derek Moore just because I love his upside. I think the kid is an absolute animal. We saw what he did to one of the tackles last year and running him over in the spring game, actually not last year, but in March or April. And he was so close last year so many times and getting in that backfield and disrupting things. And now he's quicker. He's 20 pounds lighter. I think that he's going to be one of those guys that could approach 8 or 9. And I think that could be enough to lead this team.
I like it. Yeah.
But I came close to picking Stewart too.
Yeah.
The fact that we all named 3 different guys,
and it could be one of 4. Yeah, literally. Yeah. So, which is fantastic. And watch it be somebody like one of these interior linemen coming out of nowhere. And how are you going to double team Chris Jenkins when you got Mason Graham in there? Now, Mason Graham has improved dramatically as a pass rusher. And what we heard, the intel that we provided, you can read it at the Wolverine.com, is that the defensive line got much better. They were really disruptive in pass rush when they were in there on Saturday in that scrimmage. So you're going to have to pick your poison, guys, on this team. I can't wait to see them unleash that defense on some of these teams.
It's a great point. We've seen the last couple of years, Mozzie and Chris Hinton, then Mozzie and Chris Jenkins last year. But now you may have a true pick your poison spot where last year it was pretty obvious. You're going to double team the guy that is built like a house, Mozzie Smith. But now you got, a freak in Chris Jenkins and Mason Graham there who seems to have taken the next step. So I think you're right. it's going to be some tough decisions for, how they're going to play that opposing offenses. Edge, as we kind of talked about with that, I think it's truly going to be one of those position battles that goes into the season. Offensive tackle, Jim Harbaugh said likely the same way. He said probably corner and potentially center, the same thing. Your guys' thoughts on that? People complain about the season or the schedule, not being, what it maybe could be in the non-conference with marquee opponents, but this has given you another opportunity like they did at quarterback last year to kind of figure some things out and not play it like a preseason game, but kind of play it like a preseason game in a couple different ways.
As long as it's the first 2 games, and then by game 3, you have to start developing that chemistry. And you're like, okay,
yep.
You guys are all equal. Whoever wins, in terms of whoever shows best in these games, kind of like JJ and Cade last year, is going to be the guy in game 3 and going forward, barring something, crazy, barring a complete collapse in game 3, because you've got to develop that chemistry on the offensive line, number one. I think Drake Nugent's going to be the guy there, but I do think Greg Crippen's going to get a lot of reps in the first 3 games of the year just because of the schedule and because of the opponents. But I do think Drake Nugent's the guy. Could be fascinating to see how he holds up against some of the bigger defensive linemen in the conference, because, some have described him as better than Andrew Vastardis, not quite as dominant powerfully as Olu Oluwatimi, as few were. However, he gets on you faster, is what Mason Graham said. So he's tougher to deal with because you got to combat that earlier. So I'm excited to see that. As for the corners, same thing. You know what? That's not as important in my opinion. It's a guy. You know what? If a guy goes out there in game 3 that had won the job after 2 games and stinks it up, you can put another guy in there. And it's not so much chemistry, as long as he's not making mental mistakes, as it is physical ability. So, but to me, that's where I am with the offensive line, especially. And I'm excited to see him play. I'm a little bit leery of Carson Barnhart at left tackle, although I love the kid. I think he's a great lineman. I just don't know that he's a great left tackle. But if he's the best you got, then you go with him. Look at John Runyon, for example. He's a guard in the NFL, but was an all Big Ten left tackle. So I trust Jerome more than I trust me or anybody else to make these decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. And unlike like last year, we talk about this Michigan method that Jim Harbaugh has now coined in terms of letting these battles go into the year. Last year, obviously, there were huge ramifications on who winds up starting at quarterback. And to a lesser extent, I feel like that's the case on the offensive line. You want to get those guys locked in as soon as possible to get that chemistry down, to get those reps together. But I feel like at the other spots, there is that fluidity. And, I think that, Michigan, for as much criticism as it's drawn for, these last 2 non-conference schedules, which is an athletic department move, not a Jim Harbaugh move. I want to clarify that. They're making the best use of it by essentially saying, hey, let's extend. They're game weeks, but let's extend camp in these battles for a couple more weeks. And, I think they know the importance of chemistry and continuity and having those guys locked in when the games get the biggest. I think that Harbaugh and his staff have done a great job of kind of tailoring this non-conference slate the last few years to make sure you want to have as many questions answered as you can coming out of fall camp. But if you're unsure somewhere, there's no reason to lock guys in as starters in week 1 just because you feel like you have to. And then you wait for a reason to put the other guy in. Let it play out. Now, obviously, you have to practice well to hit the field. That's maybe the biggest data point there is. But some guys just play better when the pressure is on or the lights are the brightest or when the popcorn's popping, so to speak. And that game performance is a data point to settle some of these battles. So, for me, I think that the idea that nothing is decided, your play will always decide if you're on the field or not, whether it's week 1, whether it's week 6, whether it's week 12. That's important for a team that, has these championship aspirations, because it always adds a little more juice and a little more edge to your preparation when you know that you have to keep fighting to earn your spot.
No doubt. I want to talk about a couple injuries and then a couple guys who are rising up the depth chart as we close out. But before we do that, let's talk about our friends over at Gametime. Sometimes it's stressful when you're trying to find tickets. I know, CB, you recently went to a Tigers game. Anthony, you've been to a couple Tigers games this summer. I'm planning on going to a Lions game. Already got a group text going about
Nice.
that. But it's a little bit stressful sometimes when you're trying to find the right price, how many you can get together, that sort of thing. I'm already stressed thinking about it, but buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They have killer deals on last-minute tickets and a best price guarantee, so you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you will have. I used Gametime last year for a Lions game. I know, Anthony, you've used it in the past as well. One of my favorite features, the image of your seat, so you are not going to be guessing, especially when you're going into a stadium for the first time, where your seat's going to be. You'll get to see a picture of it. Again, lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, job loss protection, and more with Gametime. So you're going to have Michigan games this fall. You're going to have, potentially MLB games wherever you live right now, NFL, NBA coming up, all that. So you're going to want to go to Gametime. It's the best place for last-minute ticket deals. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code Wolverine for $20 off your first purchase. Again, the code Wolverine, $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem code Wolverine for $20 off. Download the Gametime app. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're also brought to you today by My Perfect Franchise. Are you ready to leave the corporate rat race for the American dream? Looking for a side hustle while working your current job? Wanting to diversify, build wealth, and or leave a legacy? Well, Andy Luedecke over at My Perfect Franchise can help. Andy is a franchise consultant as well as a franchise owner and helps people find franchises that fit their skill sets, financial requirements, time to commit, and more. His services are 100% free, and he's here to help if you have any questions about business ownership. Contact Andy Luedecke, www.myperfectfranchise.net. On the phone, 404-973-9901. Email Andy at myperfectfranchise.net and go to his website there. Book a time with him on his calendar. So thank you to My Perfect Franchise. Amorion Walker, we saw him on crutches last week. We included that in Inside the Fort. Last Friday, Jim Harbaugh saying that he has been out with something. He hoped to get him back in 4 to 5 days. He said that on Tuesday. Then we got Josh Wallace talking to him yesterday as well. He said even that it's too early to tell who's the starter, who the starter is going to be. We mentioned corner as one of those spots where Jim Harbaugh could rotate guys in first couple games and see who wins. But to me, it feels like Josh Wallace has the lead there, fellas.
He does, and Amorion Walker can't afford to miss any practice time,
right?
And that's a problem. And I'm not saying it's his fault. Sometimes these things happen. There have been guys in the recent past who just sat out, saying they had a hangnail or something like that, and it was better that they left. And these guys here, I have no doubt, based on the culture and what these guys, how badly these guys want to play, and they know that they're in a dogfight for playing time, that if they're hurt, they're hurt. But it certainly hurts their chances to get on the field. So. And that's why I think that's number one. Number two, I just think Josh Wallace is probably the best option at this point. The guy's played a lot of football. He's tied at the hip with Mike Sainristil. You cannot be tied at the hip with a better guy than him in terms of learning the ropes and how to do things around here. A captain, you got 1 2-time captain, most likely, with a 3-time captain from UMass. These guys seem just like kindred spirits. So I'm excited to see what he brings to the table, because we know that Will Johnson's going to lock down one side of the field. We know that they've got great talent at safety, especially Rod Moore. Makari Page is underrated, as we've said. So I think that's where this is headed. But you do want to see Amorion Walker get in there and get some reps, because if that's his future, then let's see what he can do.
Yeah, and I feel like I said this a little earlier too. Like, I've always got the impression that the Amorion Walker experiment was going to be a little more of a slow burn.
Mm-hmm.
That might not even, that's a seed that might not even bear fruit this year. We don't know yet. But the way that you find out is by being on the field. And if you're not out there, and again, it's not his fault, it's a victim of circumstance, you can't get those reps. So it kind of turns this 3-horse race into a 2-man race for now. And, Wallace looks like he could be the guy. I like the makeup. I like obviously the experience. And, I asked him that yesterday. Is it kind of weird to be this, the most experienced guy in a position group, but also the newest guy in the room. And, that's going to be an interesting dynamic, but it seems like he's fit right in. I think that he'll be, if nothing else, super solid if he winds up starting on the other side of Will Johnson. We'll see where it goes from there.
something I asked Josh Wallace yesterday was his strength as a corner, what he feels like he's best at. And he said, press man right now. He said, we did that a lot at UMass. I said, you don't have to tell us. I mean, we know all about a Don Brown defense, but it'll be interesting. He's going to have to play more zone. He'll be going up against better athletes. He said it does feel a little bit different in practice. And I wouldn't say these Michigan receivers are elite. Now, if these Michigan receivers were an opponent like they are right now in practice, they'd probably still be one of the better cores that Josh Wallace and this Michigan secondary are going to face this year. But it's going to be interesting. Now, when you do play the better receivers, Penn State, Ohio State, Maryland, I do think he'll have plenty of games under his belt in the Big Ten. So that'll be interesting to follow, though, with him. But it does feel like it's his job right now. And as Jim Harbaugh said, which excited me on Tuesday because I've been saying it, they're at their best when Mikey Sainristil, is at the nickel. And fun fact on Mikey Sainristil is Mikey is spelled Mike. He's not Mike. We just found that out the other day from they're putting the bios together over at MGO Blue. So, but yeah, I think that dynamic between those two and the fact that they've become close has been important. Let's move over to punt and kick returner. CB asking the question to Jim Harbaugh on Tuesday. The question that a lot of us have been wondering because it's so wide open after you lose AJ Henning, Roman Wilson, kick returner for part of last year, but Jim Harbaugh saying Mike Sainristil at punt returner, Mikey, excuse me. It's going to take a little bit of an adjustment. Kalel Mullings and Donovan Edwards. He said Donovan Edwards is looking really good there. Not surprising. Kick returner, Kalel Mullings, Roman Wilson, Iman Dennis, and then the secret plan with Alex Orji, who could be the greatest kick returner of all time. I want to talk about him specifically with a quick question to you guys in a minute, but punt returner, kick returner, those names, doesn't seem so bleak after AJ Henning left.
No, you know what? And everybody's going to say, "Oh my God, you can't put Donovan Edwards there." Well, how could you do that? He's going to get hurt. And I know what happened to Ronnie Bell, and that was a freak thing. That was a non-contact injury, guys. It could have been just as it could have been just like catching a pass and turning it upfield. That's just the way it is. It happens. And the only other one that I remember at Michigan was Trip Wellborn on a punt return in Michigan Stadium at the end of his career. But you look around the country, guys, and your best athletes at all these places are guys that are returning kicks and punts because it is a weapon. And it is a third of the game, as they always say, the cliche. And if you can get something out of that to help you win a ball game, then you do it. And I think that, as long as Blake Corum's healthy, even if he's, if he weren't healthy, then I'd say no. You don't put Donovan Edwards, you don't put your starting running back up back there when there's that huge of a gap between number one and number two. But since you've got somebody else there already that is a Heisman candidate, then go for it. So Orji, that it remains to be seen. I do know when he's got that ball in his hands that he is dangerous. We heard again at the scrimmage this weekend that he was really good again with the ball in his hands. They're going to use him in some different ways too, fellas. So keep an eye on that. But to me, I think Roman Wilson could be great back there. Get him up to speed as a kick returner, and maybe have Alex Orji as your other guy back there, and that'd be fine. Because he'd be a big blocker if he didn't get the ball. So, and then I like the thought of Donovan Edwards there. I really do. My lasting memory of Mikey Sainristil returning a punt, I believe, was that Penn State game when there was nobody in the stadium in 2020. I think it bounced off his knee and Penn State recovered it and scored a touchdown. So with all due respect to Mikey, who I love as a defensive player, he's going to have to regain my trust there.
You said with all due respect.
With all due respect. So I can say whatever the hell I want after that, right? Sure as heck can. Yeah. That's right.
The idea that you could have a 6'3", 235-pound kick returner that's just truck sticking everyone is the most Michigan and most Jim Harbaugh thing I could possibly imagine. And of course, he says the key to all of it is making sure it's blocked well, which again is, that goes without saying, but it's fun to think about. And that's the thing with, I won't park out on this too long, but Alex Orji to me just still remains so interesting because I don't know if he's a quarterback. We don't know if he's a kick returner. I don't know if he's a running back. Is he a linebacker? I don't know, but I can confidently say that, whatever phase of the game you want to play him in, he's definitely one of your 11 best athletes. So finding a way to get him involved, again, and you don't take like valuable reps away from like a Blake Corum or a JJ McCarthy on the goal line, but I don't know. Maybe you do too. I'm so fascinated to see with what they do with him because, it's just another Jim Harbaugh football experiment.
Based on what we heard in the scrimmage, keep your eyes open, guys. It's going to be pretty interesting.
Okay. The last thing that both of you guys said leads in perfectly to my question. Is this Alex Orji experiment potentially a kick returner, maybe at the goal line or whatever, different ways they're going to use him? Is it the next Dan Villari, Taysom Hill type of thing? Is this a Jim Harbaugh experimenting, but once push comes to shove, we don't necessarily see it in games?
I think you'll see him at different times and different places in games. You'll still see him as a wildcat quarterback at times, and then I think you will see him at other spots on the field other than just there and at kick return. That's all I'll say at this point.
In when it counts?
When it counts against ECU or against, you know what? Maybe if he does it against in these early games and he shows that he can, for example, say he goes out there and maybe say they throw a pass to him or something like that, and he shows some wiggle and he shows he can get open as a 230-pound receiver or something like that. You know what? Then you do what you can because he's a great athlete and you want him on that field if he can do that. So we'll see how it plays out, but I definitely think he will have a bigger role this year in a few different ways.
Starting left tackle. You heard it here first.
No, that will not. They'd have to put about 70 pounds on him in the next 2.5 weeks. I don't think that's going to happen. As good as Ben Herbert is, I don't think that's going to happen.
People forget Jim Harbaugh ran down on kickoffs as a rookie for the Chicago Bears in the NFL because he wanted to feel pain on Mondays again, and he wasn't feeling that as a backup quarterback. So, feels like Alex Orji might have some of that in him as well, even though he, seems like he wants to stick at quarterback. Some quick hitters to close us out, depth chart risers, starting with Carson Barnhart, who apparently is the best tackle so far during fall camp. This complicates things because, if Ladarius Henderson's good enough to start on the left side, you can move Carson to the right side, and the two guys battling there may not win the job. But Carson Barnhart, I know, Chris, you said a little bit leery of him there. I agree with you. And frankly, I'm a little bit weary about Ladarius Henderson because he hasn't necessarily established himself there at this point too. And that could change and it'll go into the season, but your guys' thoughts on Barnhart?
Yeah, I like him as my starting right tackle because I know what he can do there. I like him as an interior guy. Do I like him at left tackle? That remains to be seen. I love the kid as an offensive lineman. I think that he brings a ton to the table, but that's a tall order, fellas. For a guy that's not a natural at that position. And again, I've said we've seen it. John Runyon did it, and now he's a guard in the NFL. So, and he looks like he's in great shape. I think Barnhart came back. He's healthier than he was last year. I think he had some back issues last year, without going into too much detail, that slowed him a little bit. So, but I do think he's one of their best 5 linemen. And if that means he plays left tackle, then that's what it means. But I do know that they recruited Ladarius Henderson to be the left tackle, and we're hopeful about it. So, but man, you got guys like Miles Hinton in there, who I think is going to be an absolute stud if he puts it all together. He's a huge human being. So it's up to Sharon Moore to make it work. And as Trevor Keegan said the other day, he said, we'll get there. He said, it takes time to build that chemistry. He said, I'm so used to Ryan Hayes being on one side and Olu on the other side of me. But, he said, we'll build that chemistry. We'll get there. And like you said, right now, the D-line is ahead of the offensive line.
Yeah, I mean, I know the going theory is that 3 offensive line spots have been up for grabs. I really think it's just the 2 because I think that your best 5 does include Barnhart at one of those tackle spots. So, again, I'm with Chris. I think the best version of him is probably at right tackle, and then the next best version would be kicking inside to guard if there's an injury somewhere, which knock on wood, you're not hoping for that, but I think he's capable. They've had they can make it work if they need to, but the fact that, like you said, Clay, the fact that Ladarius Henderson hasn't kind of come in, and it's not maybe it's not entirely his fault, but just maybe hasn't quite hit the ground running like we thought he might. That's something else to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I agree with you guys. We talked about Josh Wallace. Would say he probably rose up. Christian Dixon pushing for 2 deep status. But the freshman wide receivers that get mentioned first by Sharon Moore on BTN, and then Jim Harbaugh asked about the wide receivers. Every other position, he was reading the depth chart from the top down. This, he says, first I want to start with the freshmen, and then he goes into detail about those guys. maybe a motivational ploy a little bit to some of the other guys, especially the ones banged up. But your guys' thoughts on these guys coming in impressive?
That was the first thing I was going to say, because last year we heard about the freak show trio of receivers, and I think Tyler Morris is the guy who's ahead of those three. And I don't think anybody would have predicted that last year, coming off the knee injury, that at this point in his career, he'd be ahead of Darius Clemens and Amorian Walker, who is now a cornerback. But I think Darius Clemens is a guy, who needs to step up now. Okay, you're a sophomore, and it's going to hurt him if he's not out there getting the reps. When Jim Harbaugh said these three guys are better than anybody he's seen getting in and out of breaks that Michigan's had, all three of them, is that akin to the three freak show remark of last year? Who knows? But it's exciting, because I know that Frederick Moore, I know they loved him. They were trying to hide him, is what Ron Bellamy told me. He said, you know what, we didn't want to lose him to somebody else because we knew he was underrated. So he's really a 4-star guy, and it's playing out that way.
Yeah, I think the thing with Clemens too, and I've tried so hard, over the last few weeks to not turn him into a lightning rod, but I think there was kind of a message sent this week in terms of, listen, if you're going to play college football at this level, you have to play through the bumps and the bruises sometimes, and I know that everyone wants to be as close to 100% as they can this time of year, but it's a physical game, and there's a lot that you kind of have to fight through. So I buy that these freshmen have come in and done well. I mean, I've only seen Samaj Morgan play in person prior to playing at Michigan, and the dude's just a gamer, and it doesn't surprise me that someone like that comes in and is making a push early on. But lost in the shuffle is that Christian Dixon is kind of slowly, I won't say coming on, but he's been a factor too. So there's a lot that needs to happen for a guy like for some of these guys to hit the field. But the fact that you see freshmen or you hear that freshmen are taking reps with the ones and the twos, that's always eye-opening, because that's a tough position to play unless you're a 5-star type of guy.
And also why I think this is a motivational ploy too is Christian Dixon. One of Jim Harbaugh's reasons for him being up there was that he's always available. He said your best ability is availability, classic line, but and good for Christian Dixon too, because he's waited around, and by all accounts he's been a hard worker. But I just thought that was very interesting. And as we know, Jim Harbaugh says things for different reasons at different times. Few others, real quick. Seems like sophomore tight end Marlon Klein. I know Grant Newsome talked about him coming into camp. Like, he's in that group right now that's playable. It seems like you've seen some pictures, video him in with the ones at times. Jaden Hood is a guy who probably in the 2 deep at this point. And then Keon Saab seems like has taken a pretty big step as well. So Jesse Minter talks about wanting to be deeper on defense, wanting to be healthy at the end of the year. I think specifically Hood and Saab could really help.
Yeah, I think Jimmy Rolder and I think Matt Hibner have actually missed a little bit of time. So I think that maybe explains some of it too, because I'd heard good things about Rolder coming out of summer. So again, best ability is availability. So, right. And if you aren't practicing, somebody else is. And again, not taking anything away from these guys, especially if they're seriously injured. But you know what? Sometimes you got to play through some pain.
Yeah, and it's not to say that they aren't like that. I mean, it might be the fact that they just can't be out there, or right. Something happened on a 100%. Certain day. You go down one day and another guy has a great practice. All of a sudden, things shift there. But yeah, it's good that there's competition everywhere, because, like we said, there are so many. Like, we know what this team is for the most part, but the fact that you want those guys on the second and third teams to keep kind of battling out, because if you need them to come in, they got to be ready to play. So the fact that most of these battles are taking place, kind of on the lower parts of the depth chart, I think that does make this team stronger.
No doubt. That is going to be our show for today. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like the video, hit that thumbs up button. If you're excited for the season, that should mean thousands of likes. If you're excited for this football season, unless you're a Michigan State fan lurking, then maybe not so much. Subscribe button as well. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Head to thewolverine.com for all of your Michigan football, basketball recruiting coverage, and we will see you next time.